2 to order, and I guess we move right to announcements.
The meeting is being recorded by the recording clerk for record keeping. Is there anyone else present who wishes to record the meeting?
I would like to.
Okay, good. To attendees of the meeting, a sign-in sheet is being circulated. Gary? The board asks that you please sign in to indicate your attendance at today's meeting.
All right. Is there a sign-in sheet?
Thank you. There is. Sam wants to know if you're here.
With that, we'll move right into the first item, Brook Park Irrigation Well Contract. I feel like I'll look at Kevin and then probably look at Gary not long after.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So we have a contract in front of you tonight for work which was in essence required work of the town to ensure that our irrigation system was functioning up to Brook. As you remember, we've been chasing the lines for the last couple of years. Further due diligence determined that there was a pressure issue and the amount of water that being pumped couldn't actually activate the heads. And so through ARPA, we authorized to move forward with the work to dig the wells and have the pressure necessary in the water to be able to irrigate going forward. With Superintendent Wild's leadership and Woody Hansberry as well before when she was with us, worked closely with Mass DEP as well as with the vendor here to ensure that we would do everything we could to get to the pressure that we needed. And so it's my first time watching the well personally getting drilled. It was very interesting, but we did have success, and so now it's the formalities associated with it. And I'll turn that over to Mr. Wilds to fill in any of the blanks.
So I know on a previous meeting we had discussed this. There was a little transition period between me picking up the ball and where it had fallen before with Board of Health. And in that, again, some of that may have been, I have no problem saying my fault, in assumptions that might have been made. So what we need to do is discuss this now and vote on it. It was discussed before, and I believe it was more or less a unanimous type of thing, that it was the right thing to do, we needed to do it. But it just was not voted on. So to that end, to clean some things up that have been done, we need to go ahead and assume that what we talked about before was right, and that you all need to take that vote to make it legal for us to do what we need to do going forward.
Specifically for the contract, is that?
For the I'm sorry, yeah, so the 34/7/1951, which is specific to the well drilling and or tie-ins, there's a total number of that, which is the ARPA funds of 50. But this is solely for that part of it, to get this well in and then tie it into the existing well to make the irrigation system that we need to have up and running per DEP running and make that work properly, which is steps to that, but this is that step to cover that part of it. Then we did discuss, it just, unfortunately, and it's not something that happens and I'm not happy about it, but it did happen, that the ball was dropped in between transition and then assumptions were made, and that's my fault that it was in place and I didn't check. So I take blame in that one, but we need to correct that going forward.
So Gary, has the work been done?
Yes.
Okay, so we're just paperwork.
Yeah, so I apologize, I made an assumption, which won't happen again, that I was told that the contract had been taken care of, because I remembered having the conversation with the board on that meeting that was presented, not by myself, so it was, because that technically falls under Board of Health, if you will, with that. I do the hands-on work, if you will, with the falls to us quite often.
Was this, I'm sorry, the discussion around having to keep the grass healthy essentially?
Yes, yeah, part of
was the
that, yeah, the
discussion.
irrigation is
Okay.
part of that DEP mandate, if you will, keeping it, and green space is the wrong phrase, but that's the one I keep using, but that's the wrong term
Healthy
for that.
root system.
Healthy root system, thank you. So, yeah, to keep away from runoff and any scour, if you will, because it's a cap landfill.
Yeah.
So, and there is where we're trying to correct that mistake that was made. Again, I made an assumption I should not have in that transition, in my excitement of trying to go forward with this to get it done, because I had a time schedule of what I wanted to get among other things, so I take blame for that, so we need to just correct that part of it.
So back when we talked in September, Gary, we hadn't heard yet who was being selected. We had just heard that the RFP was out there.
I believe that's
And that
correct.
you guys were gonna
So
come
the
back.
30B part of that has been met, everything is above board, all that is absolutely correct the way it should be. There was an award made, and in that transition period where that happened with Wendy, and she and I were working very closely with a lot of this going on, because we're all trying to wear those number of hats. That is where I made the assumption that it was taken care of, because I remembered the conversation. Unfortunately, this is where we find ourselves, it was not. We had that done, it was successful and is potentially very beneficial to us going forward with that. Now we just need to be able to pay them that they've been waiting since before Thanksgiving for the original invoice, which is $23,000, which is approved for the ARPA funding for that. And then we can continue, once that determination is made, hopefully approved, that then we can continue on to finish the parts I can get done now. Unfortunately, now winter is biting into my schedule, but it will have to wait to the finish of that, but spring, but that's a whole other conversation as we go forward.
The spring is the phase 2 piece?
Part of that would be phase 2. Phase 1 is still the well implementation, getting it tied in, and the power and that start, that is that part 1 of it. Part 2 will be the actual functionality of the irrigation system to the top of the hill, if you will, if any of you are familiar with Brook. So the secondary well is tied into the 4-inch main beyond the original well, so both when they power on, they will both fill the 4-inch main, which shoots up the hill to the irrigation system. And then from there is part 2, where we have to make sure, which a lot of the work we did, my staff last year and the year prior, fixing a lot of what was broken because it was never winterized, and the Schedule 40 that they put in the ground when they pivoted to this program was not the right pipe, but we have fixed a lot of that, so I'm hoping that the part 2 of that will come under what we're expecting it to be. That's my hope.
And Madam Vice Chair, if I could as well, just for crystal clarity, there's 2 components that we came to the select board around the wells. There's $50,000 estimate that we had for the first phase, which is this. The second phase was another $50,000, which will be, or up to $50,000. We hope it's going to be significantly less to check the heads, to run the lines, and make sure that those are working adequately, so we can actually have the water that's being pressured through the system to be used. A lot of the work that Mr. Wild spoke about, work that was done in the last year and a half, through our department, chasing the lines, testing them, identifying where the heads were, etc. We think that's going to hopefully reduce our costs in the phase 2. And I'd also note that the cost for the phase 1 did come in under budget than what we initially had expected as well.
Can I ask though, it's really like a phase 1A and 1B, right? Because the contract before us is just for the drilling the well, it's not for the connecting to the other well, right?
So, yeah,
And the electrical.
Part of that is actually included in that, so that 34,
Yeah,
34,81951.
so that is, part of that is the actual well, which is a 600-foot well.
yeah,
The tie-in, which has already been done, we dug the trench in-house to save money
the
again.
tie-in's already been done?
Yeah, they've laid the conduit, which is the electrical and the well tie-in, which goes beyond the original pump. Now, not to get into the weeds of this, but, so the original is one that's already there, that was done 25 years ago. It was 46 gallon a minute pump. It was never efficient. This was botched from the beginning. I'm just gonna say it out loud. It just was. So we're trying to fix that now. The new one is 65 gallons a minute that is going to help us in attain the head pressure at the furthest point. Now, to get in, nobody knows this, I didn't really either till I get into this, is at the furthest point away, we have to have a minimum of 100 gallons a minute to fire the heads as it was designed. That's the furthest point away. So if you know Pybrook Park at all, there is the turnaround, there's a cul-de-sac, if you will. That is the furthest most point away that has to show 100 gallons per minute to fire that line of heads. Anything beyond and inside that, back to the baseball fields, is going to be less. So if we can meet that standard for the furthest point away, we've achieved that standard, and now everything else should work, short of, for so long, and much of this, and I found that in finding all this out, the system only worked for maybe a year, and it was abandoned and left. They were using it over They were being used for water cannons above ground. Not efficient. It's, when you're using it during the summer and such like that, a lot of it's lost to evaporation, sun. It's not the most efficient. Now, when we're all struggling for water in these things, you want to be efficient about this. So what we're trying to do and mandated through DEP is fix that problem and get this system up and running again. So to your point, Raphael, that part of the tie-in is the electrical as well as the board work, because
Yep.
that is high voltage. We can't mess with that, it's not a standard thing. So what part of that contract is to buy into the new well, the existing well, the tie-in, so when the new rain board that we've already purchased and is in place, the Rainbird computer board to run the system, calls for power from both wells, they fire at the same time and fire that water up the 4-inch main.
Can I ask one more clarification on that, though? You said we need 100 gallons, and this contract says it'll get us to 91.
So what ended up happening, there's where Kevin showed up that day and we had to call. So we were at a 500-foot level and we only had 26 gallons a minute. My worst fear, and I woke up, I've been sweating about this, that it's very subjective as to when you get to certain points and frac points is whether the fissures in the ground allow for water to come in back into the well. George, Mr. Rollins, who knew my dad, so a long time, this man's been in the business forever, said I would never give up on a well before 500 feet. He was at 500 feet and that was when I got the call of 26 gallons a minute. I called Kevin, I said, I'm about to have a heart attack. So, you know, worst case scenarios came up with this, is what we needed to have. So, we made that, I had made the decision, I wanted to get Kevin's reassurance actually, that it was the right decision to keep going. So before the next length of pipe, which was 20 feet, which they put in for the well, we struck gold and water started pouring in, thank God. They went to the 600 feet because I decided to make that call as to go that deep. If we hit water, now we have that much volume or head pressure, if you will. So the pump, the new well pump will be set at 500. We have that storage as well to help us when we get to the point of charging the system up above, which is anywhere 30 or 40 feet of head pressure from where we are at Harmer Field. If you've all been down there, you've seen the elevation difference, so.
It was a very rewarding moment when we
It
were
was,
standing out there in the
actually.
cold, trying to make the call. We kept going and we said, let's go. And then we got a call about 20 minutes later saying, we got it, so.
So to Raphael's point, it says 91 in the contract, but you say it's 100, it meets what is required?
I'm being
by the
told right
state?
now, yeah, we've achieved that we will have enough to make that system run as it should. Now, there may be adjustments, some of which we've done already. And we kind of put the cart before the horse because we were just trying desperately to get the system running on our own. And we did in-house was replacing and or rebuilding ourselves some of the valve systems that are in that. And when you think about that, there are over 90 sprinkler heads for this system. And that system runs all the ball fields and then all the way down that whole system. And across the radius, if you're driving down towards the cul-de-sac, if you will, that hump, if you will, is the radius or crown in the field. It runs all the way across there. Some of those are 6 inches deep and have not been used because they put loam on top of that. We need to, some of those we found, those will be those incidentals, which we already have about 18 extra heads that I've already purchased prior to all this coming to fruition, because I was adamant about making the system work if we could get it done cheaply. Still trying to do that, so we have a bunch of stuff in stock already to, when we have the vendor come back in to, here, we have these, if you need heads, these are available.
So I guess bottom line, the funds were already approved, the work has already been done, we just need to approve this so that you can pay them.
That's the short of it, yes.
And Mr. Chair, if I could, I wanted to say on the record, you know, the order of operations, there was a lot of things in flux. At the end of the day, buck stops with me. I do apologize that the order was not consistent with what we would usually do. The end result was a positive. We saved money at the end of the day. We were able to get the water. But, you know, at the end of the day, we put in systems that will make sure, you know, procurement agent now, that help, to make sure that these, the order of operations are reassured going forward. Won't happen again.
Would you like a motion?
Well, I was just gonna say, because if we voted down, I think Gary, you have to write a check, don't you?
I will still, this is my fault and I thank you, but it's incumbent on my position to take care of that, and I should have been on top of it, and I kind of dropped the ball with the transition.
You and Kevin can.
So I will take
I
it,
think Marshall is
as
somewhat
long as
to
we
blame
can
in
fix
this.
it.
I'll throw in the 51 cents.
We'll arm wrestle after.
Okay, so,
Mr.
A
Chet.
question, when this is all done, what is the bottom line gonna cost? Are we talking this 100 grand, 75 grand, well, the 34,719 that I see here?
So we cannot be any more than 100, because part one and part two are a total of
And,
potentially 100.
yeah,
We are already at the moment under budget on part one,
yep,
and
because that was 50,
that is
and
50.
you're coming in at about 35.
Potentially, yeah, yes. So the other part of that is extensively is what is it to take from the baseball fields all the way down to get every head to fire, and then finally make that system work like an irrigation system should work. A lot of that work got done by us.
Yeah.
Some of those heads have already been taken care of because we spent extensive time before we called a vendor in Colmack Brothers who does commercial irrigation. So they think it shouldn't be that much of a tall task. That being said, you never know. So it's gotta come in under budget. It can't go over, let's put it that way.
And
to be
ARPA has
honest.
approved how much?
50,000 for this phase.
50,000 for
So,
this thing.
so it's covered.
it's all covered.
So it's covered.
I'm ready for a motion.
We have
This is an
57.
easy question. Where's the pump house?
It's all house, so when you come into the landfill
57.
proper and you come up to the top of the hill,
Yeah.
and you take that road down below,
Yeah.
Sure.
there, if you get on that road to your left is a small shed, there is
Okay.
the existing well to the right of the road.
I think what we can
Okay,
do.
Thank you.
Yep.
Motion to approve a contract between the town of Topsfield and Charles M. Rollins Company, Inc. for the installation of a well and pump for an amount of $34,819.51, and for the select chair to sign.
Second.
Any discussion?
I did have a couple more questions. So the work has already been done. So even though the contract says it's good for net 30 days from September, since the work is already done, basically, that's not an issue?
It will not be an issue with Rollins, no.
We're all set.
Okay.
Yeah, that, I guarantee you that part is covered.
And I wanna
Is
make
that,
sure,
is that because of a relationship between you and Rollins?
Maybe,
I
or my
think so.
dad. I mean,
and,
All right.
and I wanna just make sure that I understand it. So, we've already approved the money, it has to get done, I don't think anybody disagrees with that. We're spending we're spending money for work that's already been done, but there's potentially up to another 50K needed.
Well, there's
We've
a-
already approved
there-
it at town meeting, the money's
That
already
was a
approved.
town meeting.
So
okay.
that was part two,
Yeah.
if
All
we're
right.
Part
being,
two.
Thank you.
All
I
right.
believe, correct, Kevin, is that,
We have monies that we would be able to use for that phase two, and when we get through it, we'll have somebody come in and give us vet it, estimate the cost, provide a number, and then we'll be able to have a contract on that and come back.
the good, if I can, the good part of that is so far, I think, is we are under that 50 right now for what I think, and what I've been told verbally, and it's unfortunate, I couldn't get them in because they're owed 23,000 currently. And then there is another part of that with the electrical and the tie-in. I still believe that's going to come in under what we originally assessed it at. So there is that bone, going forward.
All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I
I-
like to raise my hand. I do, I can't resist raising my hand.
I-
Aye, opposed?
Aye.
None? All right, carries 4-0. That was a lot of time on a
Thank
thing
you,
that was
Sherry.
pretty much a done deal, but there we go. Item up next on the agenda, the Town of Topsfield Public Property Naming Regulation to review and discuss. What say there, Mr. Town Administrator?
Mr. Chair, so before the board tonight is a draft form of a Town of Topsfield public property naming regulation, not a bylaw, policy that we can live by if we decide that we want to move forward. The genesis of this document is we had some, actually Ipswich, reach out to us regarding the naming of a bridge for the the son of General George Patton, the one who we know and is World War II renowned. The son, who also served in Korea and Vietnam, is also a general, lived right over the bridge in Hamilton. And his widow, who's since passed, working with a VSO from Ipswich, have asked us to consider naming the Asbury Bridge that leads into their community and where he lived after, not senior but junior George Patton. Doing some research into the matter, we do not currently have a naming policy. And so as such, and we did discuss this previously months ago, that the first and best step is to formalize the process so that we have some consistency around when somebody approaches us around wishing to name something for someone. What's before you is a document which was initially created and ultimately passed, a variation of this, doesn't say Topsfield, it says another community's name in Beverly. Beverly's document that they've recently passed through their city council in October. This document I've reviewed, I made modifications and changes accordingly that fit Topsfield, including names. But also some other adjustments in the document as well that are more appropriate to how our structure of government is and process. It is for discussion purposes, obviously, to start with. Being a work session, felt appropriate to bring to you, but I do look forward to hearing feedback, and if this is something that makes sense, and if so, what changes might be the board would like to be considered in another version of the document.
Do you want some
Yeah.
feedback?
Yes, please.
Okay, overall, I love the idea of having a policy laid out, and there's a lot of good stuff in here. Couple things I would say, in section F, it talks about the public hearing and allowing for a 30-day public written comment period that shall conclude at the close of the public hearing. Little confusing, I think, in that, does the public hearing stay open and then close right on the 30th day? So you're going to have a board meeting right on the 30th day of the comment period to close that public hearing?
So I would make the assumption that it would be open like we do with the warrant for the public articles, where you set a date when it would expire for people to provide that information, then it'd be collected, and at the next meeting, we could then review that information.
And close it at that meeting, at that following meeting?
I'm not sure if you would technically, I could double check with legal to find out formality wise, but similar to what we do again on warrant, where we say what the public has,
But that's not a public hearing, that's just an open period for people to submit articles.
well, I'll double check it, Madam Vice Chair. I
Okay.
think that's a good question, we
Okay.
can verify that.
Well, in reading this, I don't know that the public hearing allows for a 30-day public written comment. I don't know if those are necessarily tied together the way it's written.
That's what I'm
It can-
thinking, that they're
Yeah,
kind of two
it could
distinct.
be a public hearing over here and a 30-day public written comment period over here. They're two different
It's
things.
similar to like the warrant, where you could say, we have a 30-day period, we're open up a public hearing, 30 days, they'll be open to provide written comment, but we'll verify.
Yeah, and I like the idea, you can continue the public hearing so that you can evaluate all the comments that have come in and take anything
But-
further, but it's a little confusing
Yeah,
just the way
sure.
it's written there, but.
And if I may, my general sense is a lot of times, regardless of our efforts, people may not become aware of something until we discuss it in a meeting. So I feel like closing the public comment at the meeting is like, wait, I didn't get a chance, I've just learned of this. And you say, well, we told you about it a month ago,
Sure.
right? So the timing of it, I think, would be important to make sure that people could still contribute after the first time we mentioned it in the meeting.
The other thing is on, let's see, section G, the criteria for considering someone to have something named after them. It says the proposed honoree must, and then it has an ABC. Are you proposing that all three must exist? The person that's, whose name is being proposed, they must meet A, B, and C? Or is it one of the three, or
Yeah, I would-
two of the three?
My recommendation would be, it says or after B, so I think that it's 1, 2, or 3.
Well, it doesn't have an or after A, so it says you have to have died in the line of duty, and then B or C.
So, the solicitor who wrote this, its intention, and I believe A is this, comma, B, or three. So instead of saying or, it just has or at the last to reference that it's one of the three.
It's
It
the
doesn't have
Oxford
all.
or.
So if it's one of the three, I'm not sure it's enough, in my perspective, to have just died in the line of duty. If you didn't live in Topsfield, like in the case of the person that's being considered, should we have something in there that they have to be a resident of Topsfield? Or could you just name after anybody that has lived anywhere? B and C, I like, that you've contributed in a significant way to the town of Topsfield. If something's gonna be named in the town, I think B and C are very important. I'm not sure A on its own. But I found that confusing. Maybe it's just an or instead of the Oxford or, an or after
Each one.
you know, or a combination of, because as I said, I don't think just A by itself,
We can add an or.
but, and then item 3, it says donations. The donation of funds may be considered in the naming of any town property. So does that mean the amount of money contributed would be part of the decision about whether someone gets something named after them?
The intention would be that if a donation came in, this is what the community that wrote this put it in. Someone might say, I will donate $1 million to put towards a new school or build $20 million to build a police station, but I want it to be the John Smith Memorial Police Station or something to that effect in memory of the family. So a lot of times donations do have those types of requirements. That, you know, we will donate in the memory of somebody, or the family will donate. We want something to be named after. Again, this is completely up for the discretion of the board. This is just a template of what another community used to start with. But that is the intention of that particular.
It says may.
Yeah, it's maybe, but it's
But
not a
maybe.
prerequisite.
It just struck me as, they didn't sit well with me. It's like, okay, I'll give you $5,000 and I'd like this named after you.
That's it.
And nobody else contributed any money, so does that one rise to the top of the list because they gave $5,000? Doesn't have to be $1 million or whatever, so.
Well, but I think that example, our theoretical naming of a police station, I look at it from a higher ed point of view, where that happens on college campuses all the time, you know. I'll give you all this money, but you gotta name a building after me. Do I think that anyone's gonna come in and wanna build us a new police station if we name it after them? I don't think so, but I think that or at least that's my interpretation of the idea.
Well, it does happen, but the fact is, it says it may be considered in the naming. It doesn't say
It
will
doesn't
be.
bind us.
It doesn't
So-
say it
No,
must
but
be.
if it's in the policy, it does say, that could sway it.
Yeah.
That could definitely sway it. If you're giving 1,000 and everybody else whose name has been put forward is not giving anything, it can carry some weight, so,
Without that.
I don't know, it just,
But also,
you could
Boyd
consider
could
that
decide
without
to
it being in the
consider it,
policy.
and maybe I don't.
Yeah,
True, and you could consider it without it being in the policy, too.
that's right.
And I think the question might come up if it's silent on naming, what's your policy on naming? So I think if we do decide to remove that, we just have to have sort of an understanding of what, if somebody says, I'll make a donation for this, it could be silent to your point, and then it's just a discussion if the board feels it's appropriate to name something after them as part of the condition of the donation.
It would have been interesting to know what kind of discussion took place when they named Proctor School.
Well, that's the person who donated the land, right?
Well, yeah, but he made a donation and they named it after him. There
Well-
must have been some discussion about naming the school Proctor School.
Yeah, just worthy of discussion, I think, because I don't think we want to start to sell off landmarks to the highest bidder,
Not at all,
you
not at
know?
all.
And then just
That's
one,
why I like the word may be considered.
yeah, and then just one typo on G, it says the criteria for naming of the name of town property. I think it just means of the town property.
Where are you in G?
First line, criteria for naming, renaming, or rescission of the name of town property.
What do you want?
Oh, yeah.
To get rid of name of, it looks like it was like a cut and paste kind of thing, maybe that was just overlooked. Like fill in the name of town.
Rescission of the name of town property, no, I believe that's purposeful, so if you're rescinding the name, so criteria for naming, renaming, or rescinding of the name,
precision
Of town
of
property.
name.
Maybe it's
Oh,
a
no,
comma.
I got it, yeah, I
You
got
good?
it, yeah, it's good, it's good, thanks. I thought it was just like a fill in the name of town, so, got it. Okay, those are my.
I like the name of, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Precision of Topsfield property.
Yeah.
Name of town property, I see what you're saying.
yeah. And then I don't know if we just want anything with inscriptions or plaques, does naming come with,
I have that same question. What does it even mean?
What's that, sorry?
To name property,
plaque?
if we took this as an example, if they renamed the bridge,
We're putting up a sign or?
what does that even mean?
It's discretion of the board as part of the package. We could put a policy that says if we name something that we will put, or I would suggest that the person that we're naming after, if we're gonna, you know what, I would put some, if we want to discuss any type of plaque, I would say that it's at the discretion of the board if the applicant, for lack of a better term, wishes to put some sort of marker up on the appropriateness. Kind of like we do with the sign bylaws when there's an appeal.
It's
So I know
probably
that-
worth putting it in the
Yeah.
policy,
Sure.
just a section about actual recognition, how do you name it, is it just on the
When
website?
we discussed this the first time, I remember bringing up Lynn, which obviously has way more things to name than we do, but in my years there, every intersection is a square, and they're all named after somebody.
It's like Italy
But-
too.
Yeah, the only designation is like a sign this big that goes on some existing pole that's already there, so they're like, slap it up there. And I think that's it. I don't think it changes on a map. I don't think it exists anywhere but on that sign that's on a pole and, you know, the little ceremony that goes with it. I lived on Leo J. d'Entremont Square in Lynn, and when I moved in, Leo J. d'Entremont was still alive.
Oh, wow.
So,
Wow.
The only other thought I had was, do we put down what can be named and what can't? I mean, do we get into naming streets, squares?
well, but I
The
think
only-
that,
The only things that cannot be are town hall and the common.
Right, and I saw what
And
was
schools.
excluded,
yeah.
The schools are not up to us.
schools,
But-
private,
but
and the
For the
common.
record, yeah.
So
But how big does that come up in every discussion about
I
what
think
can be
it
named?
probably would, because it's a lot easier to make the list of things you can't name than, I mean, who knows what somebody wants to name? And we might go, oh, we didn't think of that when we made the list of things that can be named, and now we have to
Exactly.
kind of go in contrary on that.
And someone would have to come and ask for support of at least one member of the board to bring it to the whole to discuss if it's something we want to name. So if somebody says, I want to name the tree there or that, the bed of weeds, you know, something silly.
The garden,
Yeah, or
whatever.
just something silly that's not appropriate, we could, that, it would take somebody saying, yeah, we believe that's worthy as an elected member of the community to bring that forward to the next step, that for that discussion, so. I think there's certainly some safeguards in that it's not just anyone can come to the board and solicit, it has to be an identified person.
So basically, it has to come through one of us before it gets to all of us.
Or Kevin, I think it's stated in here,
Town
town
administrator.
administrator or
Okay.
select.
And I agree with Marshall, it's a lot easier to name the places you can't rename than name all the places that you could.
Oh,
rename.
Because
absolutely, I'm
ultimately-
just getting a sense of what people
Yeah.
are thinking, because, you know, people say, we don't want the streets renamed, and we don't want, you know, what's this, you know, discussion about, like, how massive is this naming program going to be?
I gotta be honest, I don't think we have that many things to name, so
I don't see a lot, I don't envision a lot of people coming to us and say, I wanna rename things, okay?
You know what I do?
This is the
envision,
first
though?
time it's come up in 20 years, I think, so.
Yeah, it's just, people, to your point, Marshall, that they don't tune in necessarily, and they don't know what's going on until maybe it's too late.
Yeah.
And then you have an opportunity, like for a bridge, let's say,
Yeah.
where people would have said, oh my gosh, I know 20 people who are worthy of being, you know, put
Well,
on
that
that
could-
bridge, and I didn't have any, you know, awareness that this was going on, and so it really has to be quite, I think, the public discussion, especially if we have very few places to
Yeah.
name, that it's
Yeah.
very well considered with a lot of input.
And the public hearing should hopefully at least give people that opportunity to provide written feedback. One thing, is, for another example, from informal process, because we don't have a formal process quite yet, is when we were approached by the VSO from Ipswich representing the widow of George Penn Jr. First thing I did is, I met, and Mr. Gant was present, we met upstairs in the public hall to discuss with the veterans group, the post about this. And RBSO and myself, expressed what was brought to us, and we said, you know, it's veteran related, you're our veteran community, give us your feedback, and it was unanimous in this particular instance to move forward. But to your point, Madam Vice Chair, it's gonna be critical that we engage at least the parties that are most affected by the naming. To your point, my concern is exactly yours. Is this veteran worthy? I mean, we have a number of people in this community that have served, done incredible things for our country. And that's why it's never an easy thing, but it's certainly something where if we try to get some safeguards, we can lose consistency. The only other thing I would mention on the individual's town property may be named, acknowledged, or honored. An individual, the proposed honoree must, and it says have died in the line of duty either to the town or United States. In this particular request that came in, I'm not certain if B or C, if A is changed, that it has to be someone from the community who died in the line of duty. He wasn't, he's from Hamilton. And
Right.
B and C would not qualify for him either, so that would exclude him from the naming, this particular request from naming the bridge.
Well, I mean, I fully understand we're not here to actually discuss that specific request. When that time comes, that's gonna be a question I have, is why are we naming a Topsfield bridge after somebody that really ultimately has nothing to do with Topsfield?
And
So,
I think
but again, we're not discussing that specific case now, but rather the guidelines, so.
But it's a good segue going back to the number of individuals. I was thinking too, what about police or fire or EMT who die in the line of duty, but maybe they don't work for Topsfield? They're not in the armed forces. I think of the.
Well, it's line of duty either to the, so if they are like a Topsfield police officer who lives in some other community, he's in duty, or he or she is in duty to the town.
But not to our town.
Not to our town.
You're saying, do they work for our town, but they live somewhere else? Or-
No, the opposite. They live here,
And
but
they
work somewhere else.
Okay, yeah, so then they wouldn't qualify with A,
Right,
yeah.
and,
B might qualify, depending
Yeah,
on
it's
the
a significant way to public life, well, and the well-being of the town.
Yeah, it keeps tying back, and I think it's important to tie back to the town.
Yeah.
yes.
We have an awful lot of people who contribute to the town, that I think it's.
But then I also think of maybe some bigger things, like, I don't know, what if Martin Luther King had lived in our town and had done all this stuff down in Selma, but he grew up here or something, right? You could argue that he did wonderful things for the entire nation, not necessarily focused on the town, though.
That's a good point.
So I
Well,
was,
that's kind of where you are with George Patton. I mean, he was a national figure.
exactly.
But he didn't live here.
He didn't live here. He was a regional figure, and so, and that's not covered here.
But you're saying he lived here, but
If
he
he
did
did,
his
yeah.
duties
Well, if he lived
elsewhere.
here, that's another
I
story.
think having lived here for what, at least 6 months, or was born here, or something,
Yeah, I think it has to tie back to the town,
yeah.
you know.
So, yeah, I see what you're saying though, that language in, right here, I mean, all of this is, it's well set up for my example of the guy who lives in Beverly, but is a Topsfield police officer.
Mhm.
That language is covered here. What isn't covered here is the Topsfieldian who works for the Beverly Police Department.
I know a
So
little,
is
I
there a
know,
way to mold this language in a way that,
Instead of just having died in the line of duty, a resident, put in the word resident somewhere in there, a resident who died in the line of duty of the town or contributed, you know,
well, it's true,
significantly
because
to
if,
the United States, you know.
Resident past or present.
Yeah. Something.
Uh,
we just,
I'm-
basically what we're, I guess what we're determining is that the qualification using our fictional police officers need to go both ways.
So died in the line of duty, was a resident who died in the line of duty serving another community, or some language.
Well, this is what I'm saying, we
That's the
need to set it up so it works both ways, because right now it's set up for the person who lives elsewhere but serves here, but it's not necessarily set up for the person who lives here and serves elsewhere.
Well, if we just tweak it a little bit, instead of saying the United States Armed Forces, if it's a resident who died in the line of duty, either to the town or contributed significantly
But again, if
To the
you put the
country.
word resident in there, have you now excluded the person who services Topsfield but lives someplace else?
No, because he's down here, having served the town and
Oh,
contributed.
okay, all
Yeah.
right, well, there you go.
So that first one is
So
just-
B covers my Beverly resident
Yeah.
who serves here, and then if we put resident in A, then we cover our Topsfieldian who serves in
They
Beverly.
went out, yeah, and did something significant.
I'm a little bit familiar with where this request generated, but I'm not sure whether the Patton family actually made the request. Or it was our veterans organization that made the request.
Not the veterans organization that I'm aware of,
Okay.
My understanding
None.
is, there's an individual who, in his capacity as a resident of Ipswich, approached us, on behalf of the family. My understanding, he was inspired to do it, but that the family, the widow was aware, of the naming of the bridge, after her husband.
And I think, when you guys mentioned it, to look at this outside of any
Yeah.
particular individual, it's just like, what do we think the policy for the
Yeah.
town will address? any
Because we
Other
we
requests
can't
later.
consider, we're not talking about General Patton at this point.
No, I
because we-
understand. You're
We don't
right.
have this policy yet. We can't discuss any specific case until we have this policy.
Kevin, in the other town, did they have an application of some sort so that there could be a consistent gathering of information, so you could compare, you know, apples to the different applications that came in for an individual?
Not that I'm aware of, Madam Vice Chair. I know historically, just from experience, there would be either that or it would, the formal process would have been that the city councilor in this case would have filed a very formal request with the clerk in Beverly, and that would then get posted to a meeting and then discussed. Presumably, any backup information would then be attached as attachments to that initial request. And so I think based on the formality, I haven't asked that specific question, but my intuition is there's probably not a formal application, more reach out to one of the elected members, make the request. They're responsible to gather some information, understand it, get to a good point, and then file with the clerk a formal request for a naming of something, and then the backup information would have to be associated.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that you don't, we end up delaying because only some of the information is there, if they don't fully understand what is it that they have to provide, and then it's like, we've got a couple, but not.
Well, I think in theory, that would be incumbent upon us, whichever one of us is
Mhm.
presenting to the board.
So we're actually filling out the information to present to the rest of the
You know,
board.
because it's gonna come through us, so in theory, I'm not gonna come to the board and go, well, I don't know if he did that or that, or, you know, I'm gonna be, me probably, yes. You most certainly wouldn't come with incomplete information.
I think that what I would, if somebody, as one of the people listed on here who could bring forward, if someone came to me, I would meet with them, I would understand who the person was. I would ask then for whatever the piece of criteria is to do a memorandum or a letter, making the formal request that covers that information. Then I'd look at it, if it's appropriate, move it. If it wasn't, I'd say, do it again, and this is what you need to put in there.
Yeah, and if this ultimately gets up on the website, so you can say, just go and look at the naming policy, and you can see everything that would be required.
And we can certainly, if, as we go through this, if we do move something like this forward, we could incorporate an application at a certain point too, if it makes sense. We certainly could do all of that.
All right, is there any more discussion on this tonight? Obviously, we're not approving anything.
One more on the timing. It's not in there, and I just don't know if we want to discuss having it in there. Does the select board need to act on this within a certain period of time? Or is it just, can it just sit there? Go for study, what is it called? Review?
There's not a period of time listed in here. It might give flexibility if, say, an application's not complete, that it gives a person time to come back and provide more information. Also gives the board some time to do more due diligence, maybe in a certain figure, it takes a little more time to find information. It gives more flexibility if it's open-ended.
Okay.
We certainly could consider though putting a time frame to it if the board's desire is to do something.
And I'm not sure we have any other timeframes where we're required to act on other issues, so this might This might be one of the first,
Oh, we don't wanna do that.
other than from a legal precedent, if there's a complaint to,
Okay.
personnel related.
So, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, I could take the feedback that we
Yeah.
received, I can make some grammatical edits and, update some of the wording, and maybe circulate a revised version, and then
Yeah.
if appropriate in January, we could take it up again, or we could bring it to a regular meeting if it fits in a good place.
Yeah.
I'll give you my comments
Think
in a
we
marked
can
up
skip
copy.
the name
Yeah.
property?
This is a sidebar.
Yeah, it's just, the name of town property,
Oh, yeah.
just rescission of the named property,
Okay.
or something like that, I don't know, it's just.
All right, so we are moving on to our meatiest part of our night, the warrant articles, capital, and budget. Should I start with you, Boyd, or should I turn it over to Kevin? Yeah, I think Kevin, I'm going to Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just feel, I'm
Mr.
tired of always
Jackson,
going to the same direction, so I turned to the other direction.
So on the detail, we are starting with the capital, and so, well, maybe I'll frame it first. This is a continuation of our last work session where we give an updates on where we are. That time, we introduced the version 1 of the capital, and certain items in there. Hopefully there's been time for everyone to take closer looks at that and provide feedback. Also, the budget, we had a limited amount of time in our last meeting, so we kind of didn't get into much depth, so I wanted to make sure on the budget with some of the specific cost drivers this year that we're taking a hard look at, that we have a chance to discuss that in more detail if the board would like. And also talk about where we are with the salary survey, as well as the process with our budgets and the due dates, et cetera. And then finally, I put together a very rough list of potential articles based on conversations I've had with department heads, members of the community, and the board itself. And I wanted to start having the conversation if there's anything I haven't included that's a desire of the board to put on that first preliminary list. I will also say that I've started to work on the version 1 of the warrant. It's easier every year.
Bless you.
Carrying that information over. But so I think we're in a really good place. Budget schedule, right on target. Actually, I'd say if anything ahead of target. But just to start with the capital.
Kevin, if I could just jump in, so that's a ton. Going through the detail of the capital, going through that spreadsheet and going through the warrants. I know before it's taken us weeks and weeks, and we've kind of chunked out and gone through a handful. So we might say we're going through 5 of the items tonight and approving those and then getting them off the list so we don't have to go through them again. Because I know some of these we've already talked about. Some of them I thought had come out, and maybe they're back in, maybe there's more information. And some of them, we've already agreed to pay for them through other sources. So we're not gonna cover all of this tonight, and it's really necessary to do a deep dive on them. So I don't know if that's the plan for January, to start to deep dive, because in, I don't know, 45 minutes or an hour, we're not gonna get through all of this.
So, with regards to the budget updates, I don't have any material to provide tonight, so that's not meant to be a long conversation. And the warrant is to basically start the conversation on the warrant, because we have a lot of time on that, so there's no deadlines on that. The capital, after providing the first version at the last month's meeting, my intention tonight was to do a little bit deeper dive and understand if there's things you need more information on, if there's questions on them. The capital was really the focus for tonight, although I didn't want to neglect from an agenda standpoint, including the other items, because there's really 3 key components of what we're doing at this point through the budget cycle. So it's the will of the board, we can cover as little or as much as you like, but the intention tonight was to go through the specific items and provide answers to any questions on the details, and if there's anything that people have concerns on, or they want me to, there's an action item that you'd like me to consider doing, and we don't have to go through every item. If there's specific things that you've picked out through your reviews that you'd like to discuss, I know we've done that in the past as well, we can do it that way. But the hope is that with feedback tonight, it can allow me to get to a version 2.
Okay, I think that would be really helpful from my perspective, if we have specific questions about these, instead of starting at the beginning and going through each one, because we've discussed to different levels, the various ones. If I could add two
Yeah.
items just to raise, the last time we talked, the fiber area network phase 2, we thought it's not going to have to move forward. That's how I understood we left it, that it wasn't
So we're
as
waiting,
essential.
so our point person at this point, because the extension of the from phase 1 requires a heavy component of the water department. Greg Crom's been on grand jury duty for the last 3 months. So he's in on Fridays. I've taken all of the projects that we've been working on from the water special projects and tabled them for now, including his work on the fiber. So this has been tabled until the end of this month. Into January, when he comes back, the direction that we talked about was that he would engage back with the vendor who he had initially engaged with, and they started preliminary conversations what a potential build-up could and would need to look like to get the pump stations online. That information and the details on that will come later, whether or not that number comes down. It shouldn't go up, but if it comes down, what that looks like.
Okay, so maybe it's a different sheet than the one we're looking at, because this is talking about facilitating the addition of 11 town facilities. That was already done, right? And I thought the last time we were talking, it was more as a redundancy, that we were doing phase 2 as a redundancy.
So it's, so we currently have the 11 locations online. This designed for two additional locations minimally. We're looking at a couple other potential locations as well. I can update that description, Madam Vice Chair, so it's a little more clear on what exactly we're doing. But the intention is to say phase 1's this, and then we're adding on to that, so.
Okay, and so it's just been tabled until Greg is back, and we'll get more data.
For right now, that's
Okay.
exactly right.
And the only other question I had right off the top was, the chillers are in here for the library, but I thought we took care of those with ARPA, so that should be off capital?
It's a placeholder right now, just in case for any reason there's an issue within the procurement. It's a big ticket item, and it doesn't affect the free cash number. I actually met with Dan today, we went over our budget today, Dan Tremblay, our library director, and I said, this is simply a placeholder, it's coming off the capital plan, probably in the next version. He said, that's fine. When we put it in, it was very new, and I just didn't wanna lose track of it.
But we've approved the ARPA funds, so that's like a done deal, right?
Yeah, I beg to differ. I know we had the discussion. I was lukewarm on that. There were some questions that needed to be answered for me, at least to support that going on to ARPA. And I appreciate you're saying it's not coming from free cash, but even if it comes from ARPA, that means something else can't come from ARPA, so it does affect free cash. Like, I don't like to think of this as just a pile of free money that has no effect.
I thought we had approved that at the last meeting.
I had way too many questions to approve it.
I know that, my
And I've
recollection,
reached out to the library and have not heard back from them.
Okay, what was everyone's take on that? Because we should be very clear on whether we approve something. That was a big ticket item, and I think I thought we had all agreed. And I know you had a lot of questions. You asked about the sustainability options, and Dan talked about the fact we just invested a lot of money and we couldn't take all that out, it didn't make sense.
And the math
and
didn't
footprint.
make sense to me. The pipe too, that was costing
Does he know that?
$29,000.
That's because I thought
my
he wanted.
recollection, so with all due respect, Ms. McDonald, my recollection is similar to the vice chair, that the majority of the group, I know you and I spoke afterwards, that you did have some questions, and we were gonna line up a time to speak with Dan about the
And I
alternatives.
reached out to him
And
and
we've
not
we've
heard.
looked at geothermal, that was one of the options we've spoken about. Initially, the first person, so the ARP just came to us as an emergency repair, because we have a 42-week lead time, and we wanna hit the season where it needs to cool, because if we don't have the systems, it could affect some of the material that's in the building, but also the comfort levels of people in the midst of the summer and the humidity in the building. We brought it to we had 3 meetings with the ARPA working group, with the director of the library, where Dan discussed with us the need, that he'd spoken with multiple vendors on it, they concurred on what the issue was and what needed to be fixed, and that he had crafted a general scope of work of what that fix would need to be. Not a formal RFP or anything of that nature yet, but just getting some pricing. We asked him to get a third price, and that third price actually came down lower, which was great.
That's the last I heard of it, was we were asking for more prices.
That, the third price did come in, and that price came in lower. In addition to that, we did ask through the ARPA group about the geothermal option. He did engage with the vendor on that. Actually, the people who were digging the Brook well, they were talking, when I went out there to meet with them, that moment where we were like, let's keep going. I also started talking about geothermal with them, because that's generally, they sometimes do that work as well, and they gave us a consultant who does just geothermal work. So I gave that information to the executive director of the library director, Dan, and he has tried, I think, multiple times to reach out to Fiscal, not successful yet. Simultaneously, following our meeting, where my understanding and the team's understanding, and we've been moving this, drafting the documentation to put it out to bid through an RFP. Debbie Morong as well as Dan have been moving that forward. The idea was, so we don't lose time, based on the feedback that I believe we received the other night, was to move that forward, but simultaneously look at these other options. Not accept any bids on the RFP based on the scope that's been derived by our facility manager and the vendor who oversees our equipment, and Dan. Get it out there, and then we can sit on that while we wait to determine if there's an alternative that we need to consider. And then if that is that's the better option, we walk this back, and then we put in a new RFP to go forward with that, which would be geothermal or whatever it might be. But my understanding is that the board was supportive of it with questions from, like you had, Mr. McDonald, and that we would work through that process while we were working through the others, so we didn't lose time, because it was something of, if we don't do this through ARPA, it's gonna be an STM. I mean, I don't think we'd have the ability to wait till an ATM, considering the lead times on the equipment. And that was a big driver on making sure we were efficient with the discussions and trying to move forward.
Well, maybe we could be more formal with a vote. The only reason why this was top of mind for me, Raphael, was because Debbie just sent me the minutes to review. And in here, it said, at the very last sentence, the consensus of the select board was to move forward to the request for a proposal.
Okay, I guess consensus could be, but it was
So there was no
not
formal vote.
everybody.
No,
Yeah.
yeah. But
And
I think that
that's-
was a feeling leading,
that's-
so maybe we
that's-
should be more specific.
That's fine. I think part of my issue is I do have questions that have not been answered, and I have reached out to the executive director a couple of times
We'll make it happen.
and have not heard anything back. I have two big concerns. One, the math does not pencil out to me. And maybe that's not the chiller part, but that $29,000 pipe replacement. When we're saying it's labor, I have serious questions on that. That's what I've asked him. I have not heard back. And the other thing is, I am really reticent to replace 1990s technology with 1990s technology,
I know.
when there's so much better stuff out there already.
And that's part of the, so along with geothermal, I've had these exact conversations with Mr. McDonald about going back to the vendors and pressing them on efficiencies of equipment and things of that nature. So these are definitely all things that are in process for discussion purposes, because even if it costs more money today, if there's a payback in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, it's a
Exactly.
worthwhile proposition, especially if it's creating more efficiencies. It's something I believe in, it's something I know the board believes in. So we have not, I know, I can say and speak to the fact that it's something that we have been pursuing. I will make sure that that Dan does get back in touch with you and
Okay.
can answer some of these questions. I would just say with the penciling out of the numbers, the process that we will undertake is a formal RFP because it's above $50,000.
Yep.
In that will be a written scope of work that's very prescriptive. We will put it out on the street for as many people who want to respond, and it'll be a fair bidding process based on just the merits of that scope of work.
Right.
And if, in fact, the initial bids that we've received, or the quotes we received from the 3 vendors are not reasonable, hopefully somebody will respond with a reasonable number on what the cost to do the replacement would be.
Yep.
But that's the 30B
Okay.
requirement, and that in essence ensures that we're not getting taken advantage of on a $200,000 project.
And I understand that. I guess I'm just trying to square the circle between it's a done deal and this is what's penciled in. To me, penciled in is like, that's the plan, that's what we're going for. Doesn't scream done deal to me. And that's fine if it's not money that's spent already, we're still looking at it, then we're good.
And I'd also make sure, probably ironic the timing of saying this, but we go to RFP, that RFP comes back, we draft the contract, that contract comes to the board, and the board needs to approve that contract. So
Yep.
if there's something that, you don't believe in, or something we missed, Mr. McDonald, we certainly can go back to the drawing board, make an alternate to the bid, whatever needs to.
Or everyone else can vote.
Or anyone
Or
else,
the way.
or anyone else,
I
yeah,
totally
anybody,
get
not just
that.
you, but anybody
I
else,
totally
you
get
can
that.
have that same, sure.
And I